FILMDOO is non-mainstream, essentially. It's foreign language, art house, cult, niche, underground, anything that isn't in a mainstream release. So the reason why it was set up was several reasons. One primarily was the main recognizable online platforms such as iTunes and Netflix. They didn't really have an offering for foreign language or art house films, international releases. And secondly, there was a sense that the vast majority of films that get made never get a release. Yet the people in that country, let's take the UK for example, I'd say we probably see about, legally, 5% of films that ever get made get some kind of distribution in this country, 5 to 10%, I'd say. Whereas someone who has a big interest in Nollywood films, Asian films, basically films from all around the world, and yet they've heard about these films because the internet is basically a global thing. So people hear about these films because they're part of that diaspora, or they share the language, or they just have interest in other cultures. They will hear about these films, but there's no legal way of them to access these films in the UK. So we set up, I say we, the co-founders set up FILMDOO, and I came shortly involved afterwards. They set up FILMDOO as a response to that, to make these films accessible for those people to watch legally. We use the term acquire because there's no other word really for it, but I prefer to say that it's a film that we take on to share globally and monetize in the interests of whoever provides it. The term acquire, the general sense of acquire is that there's an MG involved, which is something that we don't do. We don't pay any upfront MGs because it basically de-risks it for us and means that we can push the title and with no risk to us, but also we have no cost off the top. So I just wanted to make that clear first. When we acquire films, there is no MG involved, but we cover any costs in ingesting, transcoding, delivery, anything like that. But yes, the titles that we take on, how do we do it? First of all, we have a presence at festivals. So at the moment, it's mainly Cannes and Berlin. Also, we have through the site, we get people contacting us saying, you know, if you search, UK distribution, FILMDOO will invariably come up. So people come to us and say, oh, we've got these films. Mostly it's sales agents and occasionally production companies and filmmakers. When we initially started, we did outreach to all of the UK distributors because we wanted to use the UK and Ireland as a proof of concept. We currently have over 500 films available for the UK and Ireland from UK distributors. But what we realised is that most of our traffic, 80% of our traffic, and it's stayed like that for the whole year we've been live, has been coming from international. And so we felt that actually the time was now to launch, to be available transactional internationally. So that's when we started to do a bit more outreach to the sales agents. But essentially we look for films that would help push the films that currently already have awareness. So those films that got UK distribution, so say for example, Uncle Boon Me. Some of, A Pitch at Ponderous Pickles films did not get UK distribution. So we approached the sales agent and said, well, how about we have them on the platform and we use his films that had more of a reputation in the UK, like Uncle Boon Me, to raise awareness of his other films, but also to raise awareness of Thai films generally that didn't get distribution in the UK. So we spoke to sales agents. We've currently got the co-founder, she's in Bangkok at the moment, she is Thai, she's talking to production companies out there. And all of that sort of feeds into using the public's current awareness of existing titles to help them explore other titles that they wouldn't otherwise have known about. So that's just using Thailand as one example. But also extends beyond just countries of origin, niche subjects of interest. So for example, LGBT is a genre that's bandied around, but that's actually consists of many other subgenres. So it was lesbian and gay were the main ones. Now you've got the Danish girl, transgender awareness, bisexuality. Those, in a sense, are a lot of films that cover those subjects, yet are classified as dramas, or I don't know, maybe even there's the occasional thriller. But it's not possible to find those films if that is your particular subset interest. So that's what we do, is we tag all of those films according to those interests. Films about parenting, about motherhood, about grief. The list is endless. So I think the way for us is to look at listing these films not just by their genre, but by points of interest. So that, and that also feeds into the engine that we're building, which is a recommendation engine, because generally recommendations won't say what sites, but they're not the best. Whereas we want to make recommendations to users based on those subsets. It's very early days. We've been active for a year, but what we've noticed is there's a lot more enthusiasm to engage with VOD now, as opposed to before, whereas a lot of people got burnt. This was about 7 or 8 years ago when VOD became the thing, and a lot of companies were set up, but actually internet speeds weren't up to scratch. The model, it was way too early for that model to adapt, whereas with music it was okay because music was dealt not on a territory by territory basis, so it was a lot more easier to do it. It was, the file sizes were smaller, blah blah blah. It worked for music, it didn't work for film. So a lot of platforms closed, a lot of people didn't see it as being very viable, but now it's started to come back into the mindset purely because, and I always say this, piracy always leads the way, because piracy fulfills a demand that is the biggest demand that's there. They're just filling the gap. So rather than saying we need to stop piracy, which we do anyway, but rather than focus on stopping it, we need to learn from it and learning from the desire that it's fulfilling. And so that's what we're doing. We're looking at how you have to be more than just making your films available. You have to curate, you have to make good suggestions, you have to have editorial content. Lots of elements around there to make the user experience better than the user experience they would have on a pirate site. You look at those sites and you try and better them. And that's what we've done. You don't have pop-ups, you don't have advertising, you have good quality streaming, good quality subtitles. These are all things that the pirate sites trip up on. But people are willing to go through with all of that crap because there's no other way of accessing that material. That's a good question, because initially we did a big drive on outreach, live events, social media. But what we started noticing now is it's called SEO, so search engine optimization. And our SEO has gone up very quickly because of, as I explained before, the going further than just selling a film based on its broad genre. So the people that are looking for those specific interests are finding us. So it's sort of tilted in a way, as opposed to before where we were just shouting, trying to be heard. Now we're focusing more and more on the engine that we're building and all the data that we're holding, because people are actually finding that anyway. So we're getting traffic coming to our site because they're looking for these subsets and for these films. And they're actually using us as a database for that, which is great. We don't have a lot of those films, but we still have them on our database. Not to show, but people can access and find out about them. But they're learning about all these films through our site, and that's really valuable information. So one day we do hope to have a lot more of those films. It takes time to deal with rights and everything else. But essentially, because the distribution network predates the internet, it's still playing catch up. But the demand is out there, so we're harnessing that demand, not necessarily fulfilling that demand, but knowing where it's coming from, and then looking for the films where the interest is at. Obviously, I would advise producers to do their homework, but I would also advise them to be very aware of the potential that it has in some markets and the zero potential, or not zero potential, that's the wrong word, the difficulty of getting it into other markets. And by giving your film to someone who handles the rights internationally exclusively is very risky, but for three main reasons. Hopefully I'm going to remember them all. The first one is you're going to be part of a slate. So they will have, say, a slate of 5, 10, 20 films that they're taking around markets internationally. So you won't be the only film that they're pushing. And that's a common misunderstanding, is a lot of producers and filmmakers think, my film is with this sales agent, they're pushing it out there. But no, their job is to push a set of films, so you're part of that set. So you've got to know where you stand, how your film is going to be positioned alongside those other films, and if it's going to have a voice amongst those other films. Secondly, is they go around the world. And your film may have great potential in America, UK, Australia, but will have next to no potential for the sales agent to get those MGs may have no potential in, say, the African continent or Southeast Asia. It may not have any, but they always take global rights. So perhaps it's worth thinking about whether you can negotiate something and say, well, look, I know that there's potential in those markets, and you've got those contacts and those connections in those markets. So how about we give you those exclusively, but I keep all other territories non-exclusively? And then that gives you a bit of flexibility, because then you can actually do something in those other markets with platforms such as FILMDOO and many other platforms who can make your film available in those territories at next to no cost to you, and you can see those reports. The third thing is there are always going to be costs off the top, which is very important. What that means is the money that is spent handling your film, taking it to festivals and to markets. So hotel expenses, transport, of creating flyers, putting ads in Variety and Hollywood Reporter, all of those are expenses. And remember, those are expenses for the slate, and sometimes even for other films that are part of that slate. But as a cost, that can come out of your overheads, so your cost off the top. So before you see any money coming from your sale, that cost off the top has to be taken off. So say, for example, if I had a film, went to a sales agent and they sold it for, I don't know, 20, 30,000 to the US, but the cost off the top was 15,000, then you would only see, after that 15,000 would be taken off that, and then the 15,000 on top of that would be divvied up, and there'd be other costs involved and all the rest of it. But it's important to have that sum. Always look for the cost off the top in the contract, because that's kind of a big deal. And it's quite, it's opaque, the right word? It's quite difficult to know what those costs are, and to trust where what's being spent and if it's being used on your film. So that's why the most important thing. So those are the three things that are the most important things. But I guess I suppose a fourth one is trusting them and getting to know them. And another crucial point is you speak to filmmakers who have dealt with those sales agents and distributors before, so you can get a second opinion, because they will always tell you what you want to hear. But if you speak to, just do a little bit of search on the other films that they've worked on, and some might say, yeah, they were great to work with. Some would say, well, actually, there was a big cost at the top and it wasn't very clear what the costs were being spent on, blah, blah, blah. Do your homework. Be careful if you're giving everything away. You might want to keep some things for yourself, because the industry is changing so quickly, and the terms that you're signing over can be 7, 10, or 15 years. The industry is going to change very quickly. It already is changing quickly in that time. So try and hold on to a few scraps and see what you can work with. If you don't have the time, and because, you know, not sales agents have slates, distributors have slates, producers have slates. If you don't have the time, then fine, give it all over internationally, exclusively to distributors, sales agents, whoever, people in between, aggregators, whatever. Hand it over to them, because you want to concentrate on the rest of your slate. Because, and this is, you know, in support of the distributors and the sales agents and everyone else, it's a F-ton load of work to handle those films, to handle those slates, because so many get made, there's so many markets to go to, the jet lag. It's a lot of hard work. So I guess what I'm trying to say is perhaps either look at handing over your film in its entirety, keeping it to yourself, but be prepared to do the legwork, literally the legwork, traveling everywhere to work, to push your film, the accounting, the publicity. It's basically like a massively, it's doing Kickstarter all over again, which you probably would have already done to make money to produce the film. You'd have to do it all over again to get it out there. Think about all of that before giving over your film in its entirety. It really comes down to what you want and what you can give to your film, and if you're prepared for that legwork.